the wonderful work that you put into organizing this event. I got the email and I was absolutely ecstatic, to say the least, and I'm just so much more proud and really inspired by all of your work after coming here, because I know how much work you have to put in to organize something like this, so thank you so much. The one topic I want to talk to you guys about today is this idea of making change. If you were to ask someone, a politician for example, what making change means, they might tell you something along the lines of waking up one day, going to a ballot box, checking out their name, and going back home and just sitting down and watching TV. Voting for them, basically. Does that sound like making change? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that making change is something that you can just do on a whim. I'm not convinced that making change is something that should just come every 4 years or so. Moreover, I don't believe in the idea of making change only when you turn 18. When we look around the room, we see so many young leaders out there who have already done amazing work in their communities. And what I want to talk to you guys about today is this idea of making change and why it's so personal to me. A lot of times when you talk to someone on student council, for example, about their experiences, they'll say, oh, well, my student council didn't do much. And you ask them, well, why did you run for student council? And they say, oh, well, I didn't really like the people on student council. I don't really think they do much. I kind of just did my own thing, kind of just brushed it off. But when I look back at my experience in high school and my experience in particular with student council, I realized just what an opportunity we all have as young people to make a positive difference in our communities. Let me give you an example. My good friend Natalie, who was the student trustee on the Catholic District School Board in Toronto, realized that the privatization of water in developing countries was a huge issue, and that water bottles were being wasted day in and day out right here in Toronto. And so what she did was she consulted trustees of the school board, and instead of just talking about the issue, she actually wrote a policy around water bottles in the Toronto Catholic District School Board. My other friend, whose name is Stephen, actually in a rural school board in Toronto, in Ontario, ended up actually suffering from depression as a kid. He actually left the school system for about 2 years, didn't think he would come back, and then ended up coming back and joining student council, just to kind of reintegrate himself into the school system, to kind of get to know new people. And when he got involved, he realized that his school board didn't actually have a strategy around mental health. That students like him tend to fall through the cracks because they just didn't get noticed. That teachers really didn't care because their priorities were elsewhere. And so instead of just complaining about the issue and going home and being discouraged, what he did was he wrote an entire strategy around mental health. He rallied people from his school board, brought them together at the same table, and told them about his concerns, and moreover, actually did something about it. Now he's off to university, doing his own thing, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, what an incredible leader this person was, and what an incredible impact he had on his own community. And so what I want to talk to you guys today about is my experience in high school and how that's defined the way that I look at the world, as well as what I'm trying to do today, which is start up a new nonprofit organization called the Student Voice Initiative. The Student Voice Initiative is a nonprofit that we're just starting right now. It's still in Dropbox and Google Docs and Skype mode. It's not really up there yet, but it's something that I feel very passionately about, especially since I left high school and went off to university. When I went off to university, I found a lot of people who had done incredible things in their communities, like many of you. And I noticed that a lot of them had a tendency to kind of strike a really defining line between what they did in high school and what they're now doing in university. When I left high school, I told myself, okay, that was a thing in the past, I'm ready to be a new person now. I'm ready to take on new challenges, I'm ready to kind of be in the real world, so to speak. And then when I looked back and I looked at a lot of the extracurricular activities that were out there in university, I realized a lot of them were kind of full of fluff. A lot of people were really caught up in titles. People wanted to be president of this, chair of that, founder of this, co-founder of that. And when you dig a little deeper, you realize that not a lot of them have too much substance going on. And that if you really want to find those real change makers, you really had to look at the people who had actually done it in high school. And so what we're trying to do now is we're trying to reach out to young people, very much like yourself, and to get them to come back into high school. And not just talk about their own experiences, but actually mentor other students to do the same thing. So Natalie, for example, Stephen, for example, these are the people that we're trying to work with to bring them back into high school and to actually get them to mentor other students in their own communities. So here in Ontario, we have something called a student trustee position, which is a student representative that sits on the school board. And what we realized after leaving this experience was that this was the only thing that really existed in Canada. That in New Brunswick in 2009, they enacted that legislation to try and pass the same position but that Canada in itself was kind of uncharted territory. And so what we did was we reached out to a student in Vancouver, pitched her the idea, and now she's taking it and running with it. And she was actually just in the news a couple of weeks ago talking about the amazing work that she's doing with policymakers to try to establish the student trustee position in Vancouver. So when I think about this idea of change, what does that really mean? There's a couple of things to it, I think. Number one, it's identifying an issue. And that doesn't mean something that's politically related. It doesn't mean it necessarily has to be in a particular field, a sector. It doesn't have to be in science. It doesn't have to be in politics. But it's something that you kind of go about your daily life and reflect on. Maybe you just walk down the street and you say, well, why is that office building having its lights on in the middle of the night? Or maybe it's a matter of, well, why are people throwing out this recycled material when it can easily be put to good use? But not just asking about those questions, but moreover actually trying to poke at it a little bit more to try and dig to the real root cause of the issue. For Stephen, for example, what he did was he went back and he said, well, why doesn't the school board have a mental health strategy? Well, the reason for that was that many of the students who suffered from mental health issues ended up leaving the system, ended up dropping out, ended up going to shelters, and never ended up actually speaking out. What he did was he went back to the school system and said, hey, I'm one of those few students who suffered from depression and is sitting right here today telling you about that issue and why it's so important to me. And so that's something that I would encourage all of you guys to do. I encourage you to go back into your daily lives, look at something you're passionate about, and don't just talk about those issues with your friends, but actually try and find a solution to it. For example, and the other thing I want to emphasize is this idea of titles. I know a lot of people, and I'm going to say this over and over again, but you'll find a lot of people who are actually really caught up in titles. And these people may run around from meeting to meeting to meeting, may do a lot of cool stuff, apparently, but when you dig a little deeper, you realize, well, there's not much going on. So what I encourage you to do is to not get so caught up on titles, but instead focus on the issues. Focus on something that you're passionate about, something that you truly believe in, something that you're willing to devote your time to, and actually spend some time digging a little deeper and fixing the issue. Let me give you a couple of examples back in high school. When I first got elected as a student trustee of the Toronto District School Board, I was ecstatic. I was thinking to myself, man, I'm a student trustee, I'm representing 250,000 students. Wow, it sounds amazing. I was full of myself. And the fact of the matter was, yeah, sure, it was a really cool experience, but at the end of the day, I was just a representative. My entire job was to sit in a boardroom once every month, nod, smile, look pretty, dress up, eat. That was really about it. At the end of the day, many of these positions that you may be involved with just have a very, very minimal requirements of your time and your energy. But what we ended up doing was we ended up taking our roles a little bit further. And it was hard. When we went to the school board every month, a lot of times the trustees and the other people in the administration would come up to us and pat us on the back and say, good job, Gorrick, you've done a great work. And I say to myself, okay, that sounds kind of cool, I'm feeling good, but what did I actually do? And the answer to that was, well, not much. A lot of times what ended up happening was people saw us more as representatives than as problem solvers. A lot of times there were a lot of issues that were being discussed at the school board, things like staffing issues, swimming pools, and whether we should close a certain swimming pool or even an entire school. And I was thinking to myself, I'm an 18-year-old, what am I doing here? How can I actually make a big difference? And the answer to that was, well, if I just sat at those meetings and I just kept kind of staying quiet, looking pretty, eating my food, doing my math homework on the side, then at the end of the day, nothing would have actually happened. And so what did we do? We ended up actually talking to students. We talked to students, we actually had a little road trip from one end of the city to another, and we sat down with student councils to students just like you and me, and we talked to them about issues that were of concern to them. We asked them, what ticks you off? What pisses you off? And a lot of times they'll say, oh, you know, my teachers don't really care about me. I find class really difficult. Maybe class scheduling was an issue. And we say, okay, well, why is that? And then they'll dig a little deeper and they'll tell you something more specific. Here's an example. We asked students why they're not getting involved in extracurricular activities in schools. And their answer to that was, well, it was too expensive for some students. For other students, some of the extracurricular activities that they had in school were not viewed as being legitimate. And what we did was we realized that some schools in Toronto actually didn't charge their students anything to go to school and to get involved in extracurricular activities. But on the other hand, a school just 2 blocks down the street ended up charging their students in upwards of $150 just to get involved in clubs. And there were other schools that were charging their students in upwards of $25 to just get a photocopied packet of paper that was called your course pack for French class. You may know about that. I certainly experienced that in high school as well. And we were not satisfied. We told ourselves, well, why is this? Why is this the case? Why is it that we were being charged this amount? Students were obviously pissed off. But what do we do about it? And so we talked to administrators. We talked to people at the school board, and they brushed us off. We talked to people with the Ministry of Education, and they too brushed us off. We kept persisting. We kept asking questions. We kept bringing it up in conversations. And slowly but surely, we realized that the provincial government actually gives every school a certain allowance for course packs for French class specifically, especially since it's one of Canada's national languages. So what was that money being used for? And the answer to that was, well, some of it was going towards lawn mowing, fixing your window, keeping the lights on, things like that. But it was a genuine concern for some students. And we were saying to ourselves, well, this is not fair. And we, as students, could actually do something about it. And so what we did was we actually rewrote the entire school board's student activity fee policy and actually abolished course fees for French classes. Where did that start off? That started off with us just going to school one day, asking questions, and saying, why is that the way it is? And us going home and not just being frustrated, but actually doing something about it. So if you have an issue that you care about, I encourage you to go back in your community, talk to your friends, and actually start a project. Start a fundraising drive, start an awareness campaign. Work with your friends on a startup. Maybe it's a company. Maybe the solution is, maybe it's an awareness campaign, maybe it's a fundraiser, maybe it's an actual company that you can create to actually solve this problem. That's how that's how startups happen. That's how Facebook happened. That's how so many of the big, amazing companies that we see around the world today happen. It's one person sitting down and saying, why is that the way it is? And moreover, how can I shape that for the better? And I'm here to help. As the co-founder of the Student Voice Initiative, my job is to try and connect these amazing young change makers to people who are just as passionate as they are about those issues. So when it comes to something like water bottle policy, when it comes to environmentalism in schools, I would love to connect Natalie, my good friend, with someone in this room perhaps. And for them, and for you guys to actually work together to try and replicate this amazing change in another community. And the analogy that I can draw is an idea of a drug. You find an illness that you care about, and you try and find a solution to it. You work in the laboratory day and night, put a lot of hours into it. It may work, there may be side effects, but it works pretty well. What's the next step? It's to bring it into a community and to do a pilot test. Well, a lot of students out there, in my opinion, have already done amazing work. One person I see in the audience today is Yang. He organized the first multi-school spelling bee because it's never existed before. Wouldn't it be cool to have this idea be replicated in Calgary, in New Brunswick, in British Columbia, in San Francisco? That's what we're trying to do. And if you're interested in becoming either a mentor, if you think you have an idea that is worth sharing, talk to me about it. If you want to get involved in this change creation process of replicating change, of taking an idea from the laboratory into a community and into another community so that it actually spawns a ripple effect of change, I encourage you to speak to me as well. Because we together, I feel, can actually make a positive change together. It's not about the titles. It's not about the cushy awards that you get along the way. It's about how you, as an individual, can roll up your sleeves and actually get something done together. Thank you so much.